Welcome to the latest episode of the IoT Leaders podcast, the podcast where we try and shine insight and light on the issues surrounding the complex world of IoT. And I'm absolutely delighted in this episode to introduce someone who I've worked with in a previous life, but we'll come on to that, the CEO of Relayr, Josef Brunner. Josef, great to see you. How are you keeping?
Good, and I'm excited to have that discussion with you. I'm always excited to talk to you.
Yeah, who knows where we're going to go?
Precisely.
I have no idea where this is going to go. You know, I did mention in the intro that we've worked together, and when I'm asked about serial entrepreneurs, I always say, well, A, God damn it, how did they do it? I'm really jealous. And B, do I know any? And I say, well, I do know one very well. Josef Brunner. So Josef, just for our listeners who perhaps might not be familiar with your global fame and track record, can you just maybe explain a little bit about your history?
Yeah, sure. I will keep it short so we can focus on more important topics, because this is not about me. No. I love building companies. I do it since the age of 16, actually. The interesting thing, and maybe that's of relevance for the discussion today, is the starting point of my career was actually a market transformation, and one not too dissimilar to the one that we're seeing today. My parents are craftsmen, actually bakers, and we had our own bakery. And back in the days, this is when supermarkets started to bake their own bread, and the price point was just going down, and they got disrupted, right? And they didn't survive financially, right, and economically. So we lost our house, and it's still my inner pain and my drive and my nucleus. And that's how I got started. And this was with 16. And then with 18, I could buy them a new house, which is still the biggest thing for me. Wow. And they still live in this house. And it's obviously, as you can imagine, the emotional hub for me, and the source of a lot of inspiration and power. But then, I didn't stop, right? And I had fun. And obviously, I have to say I'm a high school dropout, as I started with 16. So there was not another career that I could envision for myself. And I stood with it, and I love it. It's my passion.
And how many so far, without going through the
4?
This is number 4. I hate you already. I just want to have it for the record. We knew each other when I was at Cisco, and Cisco acquired one of your companies, but now Relayr is firmly in the digitization space, of which IoT is a key component. And you guys are really interesting in that you have not just what you do and your clients, but you've been bought by Munich Re. So congratulations, you sold that one, $300 million, if I recall. Not too shabby, as we say. But you have a very, very interesting USP, and I just have not seen anyone else even attempt this in the market. So what's Relayr all about, and what's your USP?
So we are about keeping our customers relevant, right? So we talked about transformation and how market transformations really killed the business of my parents. And that's not unique to my parents, right? So market transformations are either a huge opportunity or a threat, right? And if you change and you adapt, the opportunity is massive, but you got to change and adapt, right? And the reason why Relayr exists is we want to keep our customers relevant. That's our purpose, our vision, our mission, why we get up in the morning. How do we do this? We try to understand the opportunity with our customers, try to understand if we can solve it and address it with technology, and what the outcome of that technology deployment would be, the business case, the business outcome, and then we guarantee it, we underwrite it, right? So
you're right. And let's just hit pause, because you say it so quickly and like it's no big deal, but I just want to pause and go, you underwrite, you guarantee a business outcome. Nobody does that. Come on, how do you do that?
Well, how do we do that is a different question to how do we get there? And maybe we start with the journey, because the journey is, I think, a description of the complexity we see in the market. Because there's so much complexity in all these different puzzle pieces, right? You want to transform your business digitally. Your mining company, a retail, I mean, just name it. Every company is impacted by the transformation going on. And it's so complex, right? You have security, connectivity, devices, AI, and you're just overwhelmed as a business executive. So, and we at Relayr, we are a technology company at the very core of everything we do. We have technology. So we tried to sell technology to our business executives, and they were overwhelmed with it. And then during the sales process, we thought, okay, let's take out the complexity and let's focus on the outcome. What do we want to achieve when we deploy the technology? What's the outcome? Why do we do this? What's the business case? And then once we understood this, we said, oh, that's pretty attractive. We want a piece of their pie. How do we get a piece of their pie whilst also making the customer successful and taking the fear off the table? And we said, you know what, screw this. Let's just guarantee it. We take all the risk. I mean, we're entrepreneurs, right? Our business is taking risks, essentially, right? That's why we get started. And there's another, a tribe out there which, whose business is taking risk, and these are insurance companies, right? That's also what they do. Underwriting something is taking risk of somebody else's balance sheet or life and take it on your balance sheet. So here you are. It's a perfect match if you think about it that way, right? From a 30,000 feet perspective, which brings me to how do we do this? We use an insurance company in the beginning as a partner, later on as an investor, now as our holding company. We use their capacity, their balance sheet, their skill set, the data to guarantee the promises that we make to our customers.
It sounds so simple, and yet it's clearly not. How did it come about? Did you approach them, or did a client often a client's a marriage broker in alliances in tech industry, they bring the partners together. But can you shed any light on how it came about? Did they have this brilliant insight and they found you, or what's the story?
Yeah, I would love to claim the fame, but I can't. So what we did is, obviously Relayr is a journey. It's not a company, it's a journey. And when we started off, we had, a cloud platform and we love technology. So we tried to sell technology and it failed miserably. It was I call it the death by pilot experience, 100 grand here, 150 there, and you don't get it to scale. And said, man, why can't I scale the business? And, 1,000 reasons, complexity, business cases, politics within companies. I mean, fear, I could just name a trillion reasons. And now fast forwarding, on the journey, the outcome is guaranteeing the outcome. But then, there were a lot of steps in between. And one of the steps in between was that I said, I need to complement our technology stack because we started off as a middleware. So I needed edge capabilities and I needed AI. So I wanted to buy two companies. And one of the companies that I wanted to buy was a device management company, which was actually the foundation of GE Predix. Larger than Relayr, more revenues, more people. I said, I need to buy them, but I don't have the money. So I needed to raise money to buy them. And one of the sources that I talked to was Munich Re. And so I explained my vision to them and the hypothesis. And then they said, did you ever think of underwriting, your business?
So they just asked that, yeah.
Yeah, and I said, can you explain the underwriting process to me? Because again, I'm a high school dropout, right? I mean, I know nothing. And they explained it to me. And then I said, holy cow, that might be the biggest accidental, wisdom that somebody ever, presented to me. Yeah. And I think they didn't know what they did. So I was so pumped and excited afterwards. And I think they were too, because they invested. And then we started to poke around a little bit and play around. We did little, in the beginning, we only guaranteed, risk worth 500,000 and then $1 million. So we did baby steps, right? We tried to learn, we tried to adapt, in the insurance underwriting process with the promises that we make, the guarantees that we make, because we were very broad in the beginning. Now we are really focused on industrial subscription, equipment as a service, pay-per-use. Right, so we were, now we are, laser focused and we do rifle shots. But in the beginning, we were pretty broad. But it was a learning experience. And they, as an investor, Munich Re as an investor, did a tremendous job educating us and our customers. And it worked so well that they said, you know what? We need to own you because we are impacted by market transformations as well. And insurance won't be the same in 5 years, but you could be a great future, right? For us, you're an option. And that's how we became part of Munich Re.
And especially as if, and I did spend some time talking to reinsurance companies and in the US, HSB as well, which is part of the Munich Re group. And one of the things that they said to me was, I started asking them about how do you price premiums. I just thought it was a fascinating process. I actually thought, and I don't mean any disrespect to the insurance companies, but I actually thought there was some really smart, complicated algorithms and that there were massive insight and perhaps AI and quants and almost like financial trading. And it turned out it wasn't like that. It was based on asset classes, as I'm sure you know. I mean, if you take boilers that are 20 years old and they're in buildings and there's 20, 30, 40,000 of them out there, they know how many claims they've had. So basically they've got a simple risk profile of X% of boilers make a claim, and the average payout is Y. And then they have these huge tables on risk. But then as each of these products, going back to IoT, as each of these products start becoming smart and legacy enabled, the amount of data and the granularity that you can get from this data is significantly greater. And so your point about digitization and is really important, because what they were saying to me is that them and other reinsurance companies is that the new entrants in their industry are actually going straight for this smart reinsurance market with collecting the data. And so it's in their interest not just to sell more insurance, but to actually get more data to price that insurance better, isn't it?
It is, and there's a lot of really interesting facets around that story, and you're spot on, right? So you back in the days, people had so much respect for insurance companies, and they thought there was magic happening in the machine room. And now you're absolutely right. With data, they become even better, right? But there's a different side of the coin, and that is specifically when you think about predictive maintenance. The reason why you need insurance is because you don't know when your line is going to be, when it's running, when it's breaking down. You don't know what outage you're going to face. So, but now your customers, insurance customers, start to implement predictive maintenance solutions. Then they go like, I know when my line is going to run and when I will face a issue or an equipment breakdown scenario or something. Do I really need that insurance policy? And if I do, how much am I willing to pay for it? Because my risk is getting smaller, because I'm getting smarter. So with technology, you're right, the insurance companies become smarter, but the customers as well. So you see almost like a transfer of power.
Yes.
So that being said, makes it really interesting, for insurance companies to do more tech and own a company like we do. But the underwriting process is changing. So what we start doing now is crazy stuff like guaranteeing revenues, guaranteeing or insuring companies against market risks and stuff like that, right? And that's the next generation. And that's why it's so exciting, right? Because it's so new and nobody knows where this is going, but it's certainly an exciting journey.
We've talked a lot about, in this podcast series and just in general about nobody knows where it's going. The analogy being this is even beyond the internet in, 97, 98. We knew it could do new things, but we had no idea where it was going. And now we look back and think, wow, we had no idea these business models would be created and disrupted. And what you're talking about here is things like the disintermediation of the supply chain and the transfer of power to the consumer, because when the consumer has the data, the brand itself of the big companies starts to decline as an asset. I always deal with a certain company because they're known, they're trusted, they're big. But once the customer's got the data, then the power starts to shift to the customer. And so that will create entrepreneurial opportunities, not for just a whole series of startups, but for big companies. And in the case of Munich Re, I must admit, when I heard about it, I remember I was in an airport when you phoned me and I said Munich Re. All credit to them as such a big company to actually be so innovative. So let's go on. I'm sure people are absolutely fascinated listening to this, because you are the clear leaders in this space, and we don't know where it's going to go, but we know it's going to be huge. So maybe you can double click and get down into the how, because, what I was going to say to you, what is the biggest mistake you see? I think you've already answered it. This is not about technology. Technology is kind of down the line, isn't it? I mean, yes, it results in technology, but technology is down the line. So you have a client, and the client wants to either disrupt or protect themselves from disruption or ideas. You really starting off at the business level, aren't you? I mean, you must you're not a global system integrator, but you're not an IoT company. You're kind of like in my mind, like a mini McKinsey, but you're none of these things. So you have a very interesting profile of people that work for your company.
Yeah, and we need that, right? That profile is so critically important, right? Because while there's great hype and aspiration around the potential of the IoT market, I think there's also frustration as it didn't take off as aggressively as some hoped, right? And there are reasons for that. And for us, the focus on business and the business case is so important, because at the end of the day, it's all about the numbers, right? Does it make sense? It's not a beauty contest in terms of technology, and it's not a feasibility test. Can I do this, right? It's about, does it make sense? And there's a few questions that are really, really important. And one is, how can I make my customers more successful? And I think everybody, totally independent of where you are in the supply chain, in the ecosystem, that's the key question.
And just for clarification, are you talking about your customers or Relayr's customers?
I'm talking about everyone, right? Everyone needs to, because we are all serving our customers, and that's why we exist, right? Our customers might change, right? If you think about very complex production processes or supply chains, you will see you have 10 different project steps, or 20 different players in a market, from an idea to a product, from an idea to a building, from an idea to a pizza, right? Delivery, supply chain, production, support, just name it. But there's one customer, there's one person, one entity at the end of the line who pays. Everybody else in between is focused on delivering something to the customer, the end customer. Let's call it the end customer for the sake of simplicity. But there is, if a supply chain or an ecosystem has 10 different steps, you probably have 80 different customers in between, right? Customer vendor relationships.
Yes.
So what you have to do, I think, and you mentioned this, the transfer of power. What you have to do is totally independent to where you are in that process chain. It's like, okay, who is the end customer? The one who's getting the equipment, the gear, the parts, the car, the transportation service, just name it. And what is the problem of that entity? And how can I make that entity, that company, customer more successful? And then you try to come up with a solution for the problem that, the end customer or the customer, I'm not talking about consumers, I'm talking about industrial customers. You're trying to come up with a solution, and then that's the business case. And then you go, okay, now I solve it more efficiently than today by using tools such as technology, such as underwriting, such as finance. And this is where the uniqueness that we have comes in, but I don't want to talk about us, but about the market, because you need people that understand that business case and how to shape it. So we have the business case and we're like, okay, we can solve that problem more efficiently for that customer and can make that customer more successful. And this is, in the context of equipment as a service, there's this, unknown or there's a question that I'm getting asked all the time is, how can you make your customer more successful, the customer of your OEMs as an example, more successful, but how in the same time, how can the OEM make more money? It's because you cut out 8 other players of that market and you eat their lunch. There's no services companies anymore. There might be, different facets of supply chain, of other satellite companies that are there to support the process. So you're trying to identify inefficiencies in a market, come up with a solution that addresses that inefficiency holistically, makes the end customer more successful, shifts power to both the OEM as well as the end customer. And I'm finishing my monologue right here by saying, and that's where it's interesting, because everybody in that supply chain, everybody that is part of the process can take the lead, but you have to move.
It's a great monologue, by the way. When from my history, when I was over in Silicon Valley when the whole internet broke, and lots of people were talking like this, and they were saying, it's totally radical. The disintermediation, the people who weren't talking about the technology, they were talking about the disintermediation. You can book your own airline ticket. You can buy a book. It started off as a book. You can buy anything that's digital. Now it's anything that's physical. But it seems to me that was a pretty simple disintermediation of the supply chain. You were basically disintermediating maybe 1 or 2, Blockbuster with the shops or whatever. And what you're really saying now is that the thing about IoT is one of the enablers, and you have a lot of other ones like AI and whatever, but assets, the assets as a service is that it's actually mass disintermediation. I mean, your point about there's no service company, it's because you are not just disintermediating the supply chain of you sell it to A, maybe a distributor, A sells it to B is a reseller, B sells it to C is the end user. You sell direct, you also charge for it on a per usage basis, but it's other things as well. It's there is no independent service company, because you're getting the data all the way back as the manufacturing company. You're getting the data. That means that your supplier can remotely diagnose the device, find out what's wrong with it before they fix it. I mean, I explained this to my wife, and she says, "Well, why doesn't that happen here? We have a contract with British Gas here in the UK. They actually don't just sell gas; they'll do maintenance for all your equipment in your house. They advertise that on TV. But the way the process works is that something breaks, dishwasher, say. You phone them, they send somebody out, scheduling and all that hassle. They then look at it and say, yep, it's broken. We know that. That's why we called you. And they say, oh, I think it's this, right? I think it's this. Okay, I'll be back. Then you get another appointment. The guy appears maybe 2 weeks later with a part, and you hope he's got it right. Well, the point about that is that if the device was smart, and our dishwasher has a controller in it, I mean, it has lots of electronics in it, you could actually remotely diagnose and actually arrive with the part. And that simple content of taking mass amounts of money out of the warranty process is an adjacent disintermediation of the supply chain. And as you say, we're now looking at radically new business processes, simplification of manufacturing, simplification of supply chain, simplification of warranty, simplification of marketing, because if you can get data back from every customer on how they're using every product, you actually know which features they're using, which features they're not using. So you can actually manufacture simpler products and only sell certain products to certain customers, because they're the only ones who want those features. So it seems like what we're embarking, going back to what you said earlier, we have no idea what's going to happen, other than it appears to be much bigger than what has happened so far.
Yeah, and I think that is really, really important, because it means that this will impact some markets pretty significantly. Manufacturing as an example, or what you just mentioned, building management, building controls, building maintenance. If you look into these markets, it's fascinating because you have 20,000 players in these markets, right? Why? Because the markets are fragmented. Fragmentation leads to inefficiencies. And now you use technology and other means to address the inefficiencies, and you do it at scale. You will consolidate these markets. You will see what we saw in tech, the winner takes it all mentality and approaches and results. Because you can do things more efficiently, you will have a better price whilst also having a better service. And it's impossible for smaller micro players, service companies in that example, to cope. So you will see a massive shift in these markets if you deploy your assets wisely and correctly. But you need new assets, right? Back in the days, you had a brand. Back in the days, you had a balance sheet. Back in the days, you could afford doing things. The enabler that you just talked about earlier, technology, is certainly a really important enabler, specifically in the context of IoT. But we should not forget, it's also about free capital. Everything we do around pay-per-use models, equipment as a service, industrial subscription, whatever the headline is you're using, it's only possible because money is for free, right? And nowadays, we talked about Munich Re before. One of the USPs they had was the balance sheet, 230 billion balance sheet. You can take a lot of risk for that money. Look at some of the really aggressive and really large hedge funds. How much do they have under management? You see that USP is starting to become less important. And that is something you see throughout all industries. And my biggest concern when I talk to proud traditional companies is they don't understand the shift in value when it comes to the assets that they have. I'm not saying they don't have value. They have customers, they have access to customers, knowledge, experience, talent. They have a great starting position, but they focus sometimes on the wrong, in brackets, outdated assets. And this is, you just talked about your example with your building. Another former employee of yours, John Clifford, who addressed that problem specifically in the building management with Learned. Said, screw this, right? Process that Nick just explained is inefficient. So I'm introducing guaranteed building performance as a service to the market. And I'm taking out all of these inefficiencies and making my customers more successful. And the power is in the simplicity of the offering, not in the simplicity of the technology, but the offering.
Exactly. And I spoke, John would be probably a great guy for a future podcast, but maybe give a little preview, perhaps, if we can get John on. I did speak to John again, and he was part of the Cisco crew back in the day. And I was absolutely fascinated by what he did. It was it was so elegant in its simplicity, very similar to the way you describe your business. And I think that's a pattern in general for successful businesses. They're just simple and you just get what they do. And he said 20,000 people maintain buildings. And what assets do they have? Well, they have customers, but they also have a lot of engineers, field engineers. And it's inherently inefficient. So by buying a couple of companies and just putting some smart technology in and connecting the legacy assets, you totally transform the model. You just completely disrupt it. And by the way, you've got a field sales force already there. They're just called engineers. And the other thing I was thinking of as you were saying it is this issue of fragmented industries are ripe for disruption. And I think that's always been true. In our own world in IoT, one of the messages that we give to customers, and you know this because we partner together, but one of the messages is, look, the cellular market, the mobile network operator market, is actually one of the world's last great fragmented industries. I mean, there's 825 mobile network operators. They all have proprietary SIMs. They're all saying, put my SIM in. and I can give you a bit of roaming, but not complete roaming. And so basically it's an industry that's built from the players out. But when you look at it from the customer in, the customer just wants connectivity. And so, that was the brilliance of our founders. And, not me, I came in after this, but the brilliance of our founders to say, the only way to solve that fundamental lack of interoperability, which leads to incomplete connectivity or added costs because you've got to swap SIMs all the time, is to actually abstract the problem into an independent layer and have a super aggregator in the cloud that will bring all the players together. And when you do that, you enable totally new business models, like the ability to have a global product that has connectivity, which is a completely different concept to which mobile network operator should I choose, and based on a proprietary model. So I think that all industries, and I've said this before, all industries start off, and especially tech, start off as proprietary, and ultimately it's user demand that forces interoperability and standards. And when you get interoperability and standards, that's actually when the mass adoption occurs, and that's what disruption is.
You have a really, really good point here, and I would like to complement what you just said, when it comes to the brilliance of your founders. And I would like to add one thing. When you talk to the big telcos, you talk about IoT and innovation, you're right, it's about selling SIM cards. But what it's really about is protection. I can't do this, around roaming, because I make a lot of money with roaming. Oh, I can't do this because it's a really important revenue stream. Oh, I can't do this because it's a barrier, a market protection. You asking a different question, which is like, what do these companies out there need?
Yes.
And then you solve the problem. So if you flip this around, in an ideal world, you and I would not be needed because the innovation would come from the incumbents. That was never the case, with a few exceptions, typically younger companies, right? Not companies that are 50, 60 years old, because they think inside out.
Yes.
While innovators think outside in.
Yes. And I used to say in the first wave of the innovation that if you actually want to know how a company will behave, talk to their CFO. And people said, "Oh, what do you mean?" Because it's the point that you're making. If you look at, when the first wave of the internet happened, and using this as a story to reaffirm what's happening or not happening now. When the first wave of the internet happened, certain companies embraced the cloud and certain companies didn't. And actually, interestingly, certain tech companies went to cloud and certain tech companies didn't. And there was a complete change in the pecking order of those that didn't. And you think, why did certain really big tech companies not embrace the cloud, internet, etc.? Because they were in that business anyway. And the answer is because their current revenue was coming from the legacy products. And so all the behavior, all the management systems, all of the controls, all of the incentives, all of the commission was all geared around the management, the revenue flow from existing products. And, when you and I were at Cisco, that was called boxes. And, it was really hard to do change management, to go from products to annuities. And even though everybody intuitively, of course they got it, they're all smart, they're smart as hell, but it's really, really difficult, which gives the startups an inherent advantage because they don't have a legacy. It's God built the world in 7 days, but he didn't have an install base to begin with. And that's why, again, I think Munich Re have actually brilliance, because they are a very big, they're a huge top 5, I believe.
They're massive, right? But what they did, I think, brilliantly is they were and are aware of their strength, of course, but they also know who they are and who they are culturally. So when we had, it was not the only acquisition offer that we had, but what was really attractive to me was that they said from the get-go, if we buy you, we are not going to integrate you. You would die, right? If we integrate you in some of the oldest company in the world, I mean, you would die a terrible death. And that understanding and that self-reflection, I have a lot of respect for, right? Because absolutely be aware of your strength, but be aware of your, weaknesses as well. Then you make the best choices, right? And that self-reflection, is something that is extremely healthy when it comes to business questions in general, right? And as you just said, intrinsically, a lot of the executives know what the right thing would be. And that's why I'm so excited about the market transformation in general, because there's a lot of reasons why they can't do it. It's as simple as a paycheck, right? I mean, you incentivize your people to do certain things.
Yeah.
And this starts with the board. The board incentivizes the executive team, and then it flows down. Changing a system like this will take years.
Yes.
And in years, you can build pretty successful, massive, disruptive companies.
Yeah, you can in this business, you can go out of business in months.
Yeah.
I always enjoy chatting to you, Josef, and we could go on for hours, but we won't. Why don't we sort of bring this to a conclusion by a couple of questions I really wanted to ask you. Where's all this going to go? I mean, let's get the crystal ball out and stare at it. I mean, the obvious answer is we don't know. But if we had to guess, the disruption that we're seeing is huge. We've talked about the fact that it's actually many times bigger than the first level of disruption that we saw. Let's just use the internet as the trigger for that. So that in itself is kind of scary. We talked about companies going out of business and new companies rising up. And we talked about the inability of big companies to embrace the change, and fragmented industries that need to drive interoperability and standards, particularly with regard to IoT. What's your view of, other than the fact that it's a huge market opportunity for companies that are in this space, what's your view of where this all could go? Do you see radical disruption and new companies rising to the fore as leaders, attacking the large incumbents, or do you believe that the large incumbents, or certainly a percentage of them, can embrace this and thrive?
The way I see this is almost like a waterfall. I think the driving force is vertical integration. Simplifying the process chain that we just discussed. 10 players today, 2 players in the future. Easier way of describing vertical integration. The vertical integration will lead to consolidation of hugely fragmented market into a winner takes it all mentality. So where you have 20,000 players, 10,000 players, you might have 10 in the future. Where you have 200 OEMs, you might have 3. All of them offering outcome-based services, pay-per-use, pay-per-part, just name it. That will change the landscape pretty significantly. It will have a huge impact on the GDP of industrial countries, such as UK, France, Germany, Switzerland, Italy. Companies with a strong industrial manufacturing backbone will either win and strive or suffer. I think some of them will suffer because they don't move quickly enough, which will lead to a shift of wealth to fewer companies. The general wealth of, specifically in Europe, of very wealthy countries such as Germany, the average wealth will go down. We will have significantly more unemployment as we are fat, we are lazy, we're chief warrior officers, we're not moving quickly enough. And that's true for Europe in general, I think. And to summarize, that statement, it's not a surprise because it happens constantly. 500 years ago, China was the global market leader. They were the marine leaders of the world. And then the Netherlands and the UK started to build ships for global trade. And then, the Chinese said, these ships are too expensive. And they became fat and lazy. And then, 100 years later, they were broke. Now, fast forwarding 400 years, they're hungry again. They're aggressive again. We are lazy. We are fat. So it's a back and forth. We shouldn't be surprised because it happens in history all the time. But the human race is interesting because we don't believe what we don't like, right? Even if there's evidence.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it.
Nobody likes change.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a big subject to finish on. That sounds like we've got 2 or 3 future podcasts there. We're not talking about disruption of supply chains. We're talking about disruptions of companies, disruptions of industries, and potential disruption of countries to do with their attitude of who the winners are going to be in the future. And the whole issue of the emergence of Asia, and that's something which we're very aware of. We're doing a lot of work in Asia. It is incredible what they're doing and the insight that they have out there. They're already thinking about what this is going to mean, especially as all the products are made out there. From an IoT point of view, the embedding of the connectivity in the product as a feature, not a SIM card, which because with the iSIM is going to go into the module, there isn't going to be a SIM card in the future. That is going to happen. And they're putting that module onto the PCB of an IoT product. That isn't going to happen in the West. That's going to happen in the East, the low-cost manufacturing, which is an incredible asset that they bring to bear on this whole issue, because inherently the products that they're making, they're the ones that will be capturing the data and transmitting the data. So lots of issues there in the future, and some very, very innovative business models coming out of the East. But unfortunately, Josef, we have to leave it there. I normally ask people for who else you could recommend for the podcast, but you've already said around John at Learned around the facilities buildings management. So I think we've probably pick up on that. I also sometimes say, tell me one thing about you that people don't know. And you open with that, ruined my ending, because I did, for all the years I've known you, I didn't know the story about your parents and the bakery, and that is such a nice story. So I have to ask you, how the hell did you earn enough money in 2 years? If I got it right, quit school at 16, became an entrepreneur, bakery gone bust, price of bread had dropped, your first experience of disintermediation, and managed to buy a house in 2 years, if I've got that right?
Yeah.
What did you do?
Trying to focus on an offering that the market needed at that time. And this is going back a few years now. This is the time of UUNet, if you remember them.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Security was not a topic back in the days, right? So, peoples were connecting networks and systems, and they did not introduce barriers or security mechanisms into these systems. So even a person who had as little talent as I could add value when it came to security. So my first 2 companies were security companies. The first one was a service company. That's where, that subsidized the house, so to speak. And the next one was a security product company. And I was just lucky enough that timing was my friend. Let's put it that way.
It's amazing how many really, really successful people are humble and claim that it was luck and timing. And I think the rest of us know that there's probably another ingredient as well. But I won't embarrass you by focusing on that. Instead, I'll finish here. Thank you so much, Josef, for your insight and your vision. Congratulations on your model, and of course, selling the company and the disruption that you are now driving as part of the Munich Re Group as CEO of Relayr. And for our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Certainly, I did. I thought it was absolutely tremendous. There's so much we could unpack for future episodes there. But in the meantime, tune in again for the IoT Leaders podcast. We will have more guests on sharing their insight, their experiences, and their stories, indeed, of their life and what they've learned around digitization and IoT. Josef, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Nick.